Hello. Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday. I'm going to give this just a little bit of time for people to come on. As you do, please say hello and let me know that you are here. I love having a sense of who I'm talking to, whose energy is in this space with me. Hi, Lindsay. This really is such an awesome place to be able to show up and connect with you all. It really just feels great to me, and I hope that you enjoy it too. So please say hello. I'd love to know who's coming on. I'm going to give this just a few seconds before I really get started and start sharing. So I actually can't see. Hi, Pam. What I titled this, I don't remember. I know what it's about. I know what I'm talking about today, but I don't remember exactly what the title is. So I'm going to start talking about that in a little bit. And then after I've shared my thoughts on it, I will connect with you through your comments and questions as well. So please feel free to say hello and also to let me know that your thoughts, comments, questions. Hello, everybody. Kathleen and Marian and Joanne. Happy Thursday. Welcome. Okay, so as many of you may know, today is International Mental Health Day, or World Mental Health Day, which I'm really grateful that it's become something that internationally we're recognizing needs to be on the forefront, I guess, of people's minds. So I didn't intentionally tie this to World Mental Health Day, but I think it is definitely very an important piece of overall mental health. So I think, first of all, it's important to recognize that mental health is not a different way of saying mental illness. Those are different things. Mental health is really no different than physical health, except it's psychological versus physical. So mental health, mental well-being, emotional or psychological well-being is something that ideally we would all have and experience. But just like our physical health is affected by different things and viruses that we pick up along the way, and sometimes things that we contract or develop, something even as significant as cancer or cold on the minor end or whatever. But we think of our physical health as something that we want to take care of. That, we have our preventative doctor visits and even vaccines and stuff like that because we want to be physically healthy. Well, quite often in much of society, we don't really think the same in terms of mental health. In fact, often when we think about taking care of ourselves on a psychological or emotional level, it's often seen as being weak or frivolous or something like that, that it's not important. And that if you need something to help with your mental health and there's something really wrong with you, that's where it becomes that mental health tends to equate to mental illness. And we all struggle with our emotional well-being. I know a lot of people don't like to acknowledge that, but it is the reality, because to be human means that we're complex emotional and psychological beings. So we have feelings, we have struggles, and relationships bring up all of that kind of stuff. And we need connection and support. So things are bound to come up. So taking care of our mental health, doing preventative things like just staying connected and making sure that you are If you're struggling with something, that you have somebody that you can talk to about it. Those things are all ways that we navigate and stay emotionally healthy. One of the ways that we as a general population, or one of the things that tends to impact us in terms of our overall mental well-being, is how we view ourselves and our sense of worthiness. And the thing about this is that for many people, we don't really recognize that we struggle with our sense of worthiness. Whether it's we don't have a clear idea of what that means, or we're in denial about it. Either one, we tend to not often be aware of that significance. So, in honor of World Mental Health Day, being able to think about what are the things that cause me to struggle, I think is important. If we can recognize that sometimes I don't feel great about myself. Sometimes I hold myself back from showing up fully or asking for support or whatever because I don't feel like I'm worthy of it. I don't feel like people want to be there for me. I think it's weak that I want support. I think people are going to think there's something wrong with me or that I'm damaged or something like that. Well, we need to be able to get through that. But so much of that comes from a sense of a belief. It's a belief that we're often not aware of because it lives in our unconscious because it's been there a really long time. But this idea that we've held on to that somehow we're not enough as we are, that we are not fully worthy of the things that other people get to experience or the things that we desire. And because that belief is often very unconscious, it just kind of drives our behavior like instinct. We don't recognize how it's showing up in our lives, nor do we recognize the impact that it's actually having on really all aspects of our lives. So, being able to recognize moments when you feel, or if you already know that it's there, but moments when you feel like you're not enough, if you're comparing yourself to other people, if you feel that other people are more deserving of something, if you hold yourself back in showing up or sharing really authentically, there's a good chance that this is going on. So, the specific thing that I wanted to talk about today is that an idea that we are unworthy really does impact every aspect of our lives. It impacts how we feel on a daily basis, and not just how we feel about ourselves, but just kind of how we feel in general. Because if we don't feel good about ourselves, it's going to affect all kinds of other things. So there are a couple of reasons that I was thinking about this in particular. And I'll share that with you in a second, but this is something that comes up in so many different ways at different times. And one of the things that stands out to me is when I first started working with survivors many, many, many years ago, we had an intake form. So we would meet with the client the first session and gather information about them, about their history and stuff. And one of the questions on that intake form was something along the lines of, what are your strengths? So I think that's a question that's kind of difficult for a lot of people to answer. But for somebody who is a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, that question can feel almost terrifying to try to answer. And so inevitably, most people really couldn't answer it. Most people would think, I don't know. Um, and so I would then ask them, if I were to go and ask your family members, your close family members or close friends or something like that, what they appreciate about you or how they would describe you, what would they say? And this was usually a little bit easier for people to get a sense of. But most of the time, like nearly 100% of the time, the things that they would identify were, I'm a good mother, I'm a good friend, I'm dependable, I'm loyal, um, I'm always there if somebody needs me, those kinds of things. And those are good things. Like, we want people in our lives that are loyal and dependable and can be there to support us when we need them. Um, but those things that were a little bit made it a little bit easier for them to kind of identify, and then they would be able to acknowledge, yeah, I think that those things are true, but didn't necessarily see them as strengths. So time goes on, and obviously I talk a lot about worthiness, and it's one of the things that in my work is pretty paramount in everything that we do. So one of the things that tends to come up a lot is in encouraging people to think about what makes them worthy. Quite often, it's a very similar response. Oftentimes, there is this moment of, I've got nothing, like, I don't know how to answer this. Um, and other times, when it is answered, it's often things related to the examples I gave just a moment ago, but ultimately, there are aspects of how we show up for other people. It's things that we do for other people, how we're available for other people. And again, those are good qualities, right? We want people to be kind. We want people to be dependable. If they say they're going to do something, we want them to follow through. We want people with those qualities. Like, if we all had those qualities, then we probably live in a very different world. But when it comes to worthiness, this is where there's a disconnect, and it can actually create kind of a reinforcement of the fear that we're actually not worthy. So when we identify that something like, I feel good about myself, or I'm worthy because I am dependable. When I say I'm going to do something, I follow through. Again, good quality. And that is something to feel good about. But if we point to something like that as proof that we are worthy, or we point to how loyal we are to those that we care about, meaning that often that means that we're always going to be there for them, we'll always defend them. To other people, we are just kind of steadfast in being beside them. Again, that's not necessarily at all a bad thing. In fact, it's often a very good thing. But when we look at these things as proof of our worthiness, it means that our value in the world is dependent on our ability to be there for somebody else. So we can only be of value if we are dependable, if we show up when somebody needs us, or we show up when we say that we're going to be there, which means that if circumstances change and we can't be there, especially if that person is upset with us, is hurt because we have to change plans, takes it personally, whatever the case may be, then in that moment, we are not rooted in our worthiness because we've identified that we're worthy because we're dependable. So if somebody doesn't see us as dependable, or if we feel that we're breaking a promise, even if there's a very, very valid reason that we're doing that, then we feel badly about it. How many times have you said yes to something, or, well, I guess there's a lot of ways we can say yes, but how many times have you said yes to something and then needed to change for whatever reason? And it's not just a matter of, I'm really sorry I can't make it, or I'm really sorry I can't do this right now. Can we reschedule or something like that? How often does something like that happen and you end up really struggling with feeling badly? Whether you feel guilty, maybe even feel shame, fear that you've let somebody down, like it really can have a significant impact on you. And the reason that it can have that really significant impact on you is in part because maybe you feel like you've let somebody down, but ultimately it comes back to a fear of not being worthy. And so, not to mention if that person is actually upset with you, then that reinforces it even more significantly. But when we, so generally we tend to do that with lots of different circumstances. Like we see ourselves as like I said, dependable. Giving people the benefit of the doubt is something that I've heard different times. Like I'm always willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. And that, again, is probably a really good quality to have. But if there's a time when somebody just is behaving in a way that doesn't align with your values or isn't appropriate, is even hurtful, then if your value is connected to giving people the benefit of the doubt, there's a strong likelihood that you're going to rationalize that bad behavior, that you're going to excuse that bad behavior, that you're going to put up with that bad behavior because you see yourself as somebody who gives people the benefit of the doubt. So if you then think, okay, I want to be done with this, and this person is not behaving in a way that is healthy, or it's hurtful to me or somebody else, then it's challenging that thing that you're holding on to that you believe makes you worthy. So when we are looking at what is it that exists within me that makes me worthy, it's not that you can't acknowledge these other things, but what's really important and absolutely necessary is that you look within yourself and connect to the truth of who you are as a human being. So everything that just exists within you that makes you worthy, and not about what you give or how you show up for other people. So some examples of that is I actually just shared a post recently in the Journey to Wholeness course group that's happening right now about, and I don't even remember right now what the actual question was that I posed, but people shared different things that they kind of connect within themselves about. And some people did identify some of those ways that they show up for other people, and they also were able to connect to some of the things within themselves. And so strength, resilience, the ability to put one foot in front of the other, kind of generally having like a loving heart, like those things are a part of who you are. And having a loving heart, while obviously that's beneficial to other people, it's actually incredibly beneficial to you as well, as long as you have some boundaries, which is kind of a separate issue in a way, but very connected. But having a loving heart helps you feel differently in the world. So that can be a little bit different. But if your loving heart means that you don't have boundaries or you don't hold people accountable, you let people hurt you over and over again, then that's not just about having a loving heart, that's about not having boundaries. And so that loving heart can actually leave you in a circumstance that can be really hurtful, certainly isn't beneficial to you. So strength and courage and resilience, perseverance, an ability to recognize that things are not black and white. So not thinking about, I'm always willing to see somebody else's side because maybe you're missing your own side, but being able to recognize that there are different perspectives. That can be a really good thing as long as your perspective or other people's differing perspectives still matter. And there's kind of a fine line here, because part of what we as individuals value about the people that we love are some of those pieces of how they show up for others, right? When we think about what we love about people, it is often how they make us feel. There's nothing really wrong with that by itself, as long as that person is also receiving some of those things, hopefully from us, but also from other people. Because one of the things that happens so often for a lot of people, even regardless of history of abuse, but especially for people with a history of childhood abuse, is that we can very frequently give a lot. We very frequently can be the dependable, loving, caretaking, putting other people's needs first kind of person. But those things, when they're coming from a place of feeling valuable, they're not coming from a healthy place. And that leaves a person open to then being used, to being taken advantage of. And so you believe that you're a good person because you're doing all these things, but then people end up taking advantage of that, which obviously is going to feel hurtful. So any sense of value that you thought that you had by being that kind of person is completely not only kind of negated, but it actually kind of deepens a sense of unworthiness. I made a couple of notes here, so let me just make sure I've covered it. So I kind of talked about this, but I'll talk about it a little bit more. So again, part of the problem with tying our value or our worthiness, or even our being a good person, to how we show up for other people is there will be a time that we can't show up in the way that maybe we would want to, or the way that they expect us to. Maybe we're just not feeling very well physically, and so we can't go do the thing that we think that we should do or they asked us to do. Maybe we're struggling emotionally, and the person who always reaches out for you for support reaches out for you, but what is really in your best interest in terms of your self-care would be to say, I'm here for you. Can I give you a call back in a little while? Because you need to take care of yourself. Well, if your value is tied up in that, then you're probably not going to be able to say no. So you're not going to take care of yourself. You're going to be there for that other person. Or that person is, you're going to fear that that person is going to be upset with you if you're not. But the healthy thing in a circumstance like that is if you're really struggling or if you're just really not feeling well, or they call you in the middle of the night and wake you up or whatever. And I'm not saying that they're going through some dire life circumstance, just kind of, I guess, run of the mill, kind of normal struggle for them or whatever. We have to be able to take care of ourselves. We have to be able to set some of those boundaries. And when your value is tied up in how you show up for other people, we tend to not have very good boundaries around that. So I would really like to encourage all of you, whether you've done an exercise like this with me before or not, um, but I'd really like to encourage all of you to really take a few moments or maybe even longer and just try to sit for a few moments and ask yourself, what about me can I feel good about? So just start there. What about me can I feel good about? And notice where your mind goes. Does it go to how you show up for other people? Or does it go to things like that you possess within yourself, like this strength or courage, resilience, perseverance, um, things that you've overcome, things that you've accomplished on your, not necessarily completely on your own, but kind of within yourself because of what you possess within you. Notice which side you tend to go on. And if you tend to go towards that side of how you show up for other people, again, don't feel badly about that. It is something that you can feel good about, but I would challenge you to then sit for a little bit longer and maybe even journal a little bit. Sit for a little bit longer and really try to think about who you are as an individual human being that you feel good about. What traits or characteristics, what aspects of your personality do you enjoy? Do you feel good about being part of who you are because of who you are, not because of how it helps somebody else? Because there are things that we can point to within ourselves that also maybe are beneficial to other people, but we can't focus on because it's beneficial to other people. We have to connect within ourselves that we feel good about that because that's just who we are. Like being generous, for example. If we believe that, okay, I'm generous, I'm always willing to help somebody out. I'm willing to give people the shirt off my back. So does that feel good to you because people then perceive you in a certain way? Or does that feel good to you because it's kind of a sense of paying it forward because you know what it feels like to receive, because it helps you connect to how you individually want to show up in the world and not how you benefit somebody else. Because there is kind of a difference there. Because, of course, being somebody who would give a stranger who's struggling in some way the shirt off your back, so to speak, yes, that's a good thing. But if it is, if it has been freezing cold and you have frostbite and you see somebody who maybe already has a shirt, but you focus more on them because they're struggling and so you want them to have your shirt, it's not really coming from the most healthy place. And that's what I think is important to shift in terms of how we think about it, how we even navigate our day and our relationships. So it's not about being selfish. That's definitely not what I'm encouraging. But we do, to be emotionally healthy people, going back to World Mental Health Day, to be emotionally healthy people, we cannot put everybody else above ourselves. Now, I think there is a bit of a difference when we're talking about children that we're responsible for. That's kind of a whole different story in a lot of ways. But if we never put ourselves on equal footing in terms of needs, then we will really always feel that we're not worthy. At least quite often, that will be the case. We will always find our sense of value in how we show up or what we give to other people. And we can feel good about ourselves for those things, but we can't let our worthiness depend on those things. What if you're sick? What if you've gotten your sense of purpose from I don't know, going out and walking pound dogs in a pound every day? What if that is what makes you feel like you're valuable, but then something happens and you can no longer do that? You break your leg, or maybe even something more significant happens, so you can't go out and walk anymore, or you can't do something like that. Then what happens to your sense of worthiness? So it has to start within us. And then when we fully connect to that and recognize that that is a part of who we are innately, then when we're giving from a more full place and a healthier place. So I will now go through here. So if you've got questions, comments, rebuttals, please feel free to share. So I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see hopefully without squinting quite as much. Marion, I'm sorry, I'm not sure that I'm really I'm not sure that I'm understanding your question. Mhm. I'm sorry, I'm not quite clear on what you're asking there. But hello, I don't think I said hello to you. Hi, Herlinda. Hi, Sharia. Hi, Thea. Um, do you feel you can be content just taking worthiness from how you treat yourself and not judging yourself based on how anyone else sees you? Um, so this is a great question. And this is kind of complex because it's not a really simple answer, because the reality is that we do get our sense of self as young people, particularly from how other people show up with us. So, not necessarily what they give to us, but how they show up with us, which is why for people that have really chaotic, dysfunctional, or abusive childhoods, we really struggle with believing in our sense of self. So, we ultimately have to be able to believe that we are worthy from inside. Kind of the idea of it's an inside job. Like, we have to be able to believe that internally. Like, that's the most important piece. But, and this is why it's important that we connect with people who are healthy, because our sense of worthiness is kind of reinforced by the connections that we can have with people. So it can be with a stranger a moment in time, or it can be a significant relationship that we have. Like for me, one of the things that was most beneficial in me being able to see my worthiness was my relationship with my husband. Even though in the beginning I didn't believe that I was worthy, in the beginning I didn't trust that he actually could love me. But as I started understanding how I had been wounded and how that was showing up in my life and everything, it allowed me then to start to heal that piece and believe in my worthiness. And once I was able to kind of start to see those possibilities, then I was able to also begin to see the possibility that maybe he really could love me. I was able to believe the possibility that maybe this friend really did like me as a friend and wasn't just being nice or whatever. We can come up with all kinds of excuses as to why somebody would be nice to us. Um, but so it's kind of a little bit of both. But if we do not believe in our own worthiness, then it doesn't matter what anybody else out here is doing. We will not believe in our worthiness. Um, so, and when you believe in your worthiness, whether other people value you or not, or treat you badly or not, doesn't affect how you feel about your worthiness. You don't take it personally if somebody suddenly stops calling you back or something like that, or if somebody ends a relationship. Now, obviously, that can be a hit to our sense of self, but we recognize that who we are is not dependent on whether somebody else treats us well, or who we are isn't dependent on whether somebody else is willing to show up for us or not. So I hope that that kind of answers the question. But so look, we cannot get our value solely based on how other people treat us. Because inevitably, unless you are like a recluse and don't leave your house, inevitably there will be people who don't necessarily treat you well. Again, even if it's just a stranger, or other people that you have relationships with. And not because they're bad people even, but maybe they're having a bad day or something like that. So we cannot get our sense of self or take it personally when somebody else is not showing up in the way that we would like them to. I think it's Janine, maybe. I'm glad that you're here and I'm glad that you're finding this helpful. Ashley, you're not dumb. Can you, and maybe you haven't been watching from the beginning. If you have, it doesn't mean that you're dumb at all. Not for a second doesn't mean that. Is there anything in particular that, like I said, that like you're confused about, or that you maybe like me to explain a little bit better? Because I'd like to be able to do that, because if you're feeling confused or if you're not understanding, I have no doubt that whether it's somebody on here live or somebody that will be watching the replay, I can almost guarantee that they're going to feel kind of confused or not understand too. So please feel free to share a little bit more, please. Absolutely. None of us can know it all. None of us, including myself or anybody else out there, none of us can know everything that there is to know. And one of the things, if you've been watching my videos for a while, even though I speak about this stuff all the time, and I have for I don't even know how many years, you've probably noticed that, especially if it's like a live situation, that somebody might ask a question that I've maybe answered 10 different ways or 10 different times. But depending on where my own mind is, depending on what I was just talking about, or just kind of where my mind has been over the week or the previous few days, I might answer the question not necessarily differently, like with a whole completely different answer, but I might answer the question a little bit differently because everything that we take in is through a lens of where our mind is in that particular moment. So even Ashley, not understanding this right now, there could be any number of reasons that you might not be connecting with it right now. But if you were to watch it, if I did this video tomorrow, or you were to watch this video tomorrow, it may feel like it lands completely differently. So that's something helpful, I think, to keep in mind too. Hi, Wendy. Hi, Phone Mom. And I know that I know who you are, but I'm sorry I can't remember. Um, yes, shame and worthiness, or shame and unworthiness, I guess I should say, are very directly linked. So being able to release and or heal shame is is absolutely necessary in order for us to believe fully in our worthiness. Because no matter what kind of work we do, mindset work, limiting belief work we do, or whatever about worthiness, if we are holding on to shame for anything at all, then we will never be able to fully believe in our worthiness. And that is just a reality. Um, I see what you're saying, Ashley. The concept of worthiness goes over my head. I cannot connect the dots. Um, so, well, I could go in so many different directions here. So, I will try to just kind of say something about this fairly succinctly, which is difficult for me to do. But many of us don't really think about whether we believe we're worthy or not. Like an actual conscious thought of I'm unworthy isn't something that most people would actually recognize. But our sense of worthiness, again, so this is living at a subconscious level. So it's not something we necessarily think about. But our sense of worthiness very directly dictates how we feel kind of about ourselves in general. Um, it affects how we tend to feel day to day. It definitely affects our willingness to take risks, to try new things, to tell somebody we love them, um, to be vulnerable. It affects everything. And it certainly affects relationships, or the kinds of relationships that we have in our lives. Because if we believe that we are unworthy, and whether it's really, really strongly believe we're unworthy, or have moments when we really believe that we're unworthy, then we don't show up fully in our lives. We don't fully believe that the things that we want, we have a right to, or that we're capable of having them. When we don't believe that we're worthy, we have a difficult time accepting that a friend could actually want to be our friend, that a potential partner or a date even could actually want to get to know us for us and not because they're going to get something from us. Um, it also affects how connected we're able to be in relationship with others, how freely we can actually love another. It doesn't mean that we can't love somebody if we believe that we're unworthy, because we can, but that love is not free. It's filled with uncertainty. And that uncertainty can look a lot of different ways depending on circumstances, but it's not fully free. There's a lot of vulnerability that's tied to that. So That's why worthiness matters. And if you've read or listened to Brene Brown, that's one of the things that she talks about all the time, right? Um, and because it does literally dictate everything. Um, so being able to recognize that maybe that's something that we hold on to. In some ways that you might recognize that unworthiness may be present is shame, first of all. If you ever feel shame about anything, and guilt and shame are often very, very closely tied. They don't have to be the same, but for many people, guilt automatically becomes shame. Um, if you're afraid of people knowing certain things or knowing that you're struggling or something like that, there's a good chance that you don't feel worthy. If there's something that you want to go after in your life, but you hold yourself back for any number of reasons, you might come up with some very rational reasons why you might not do it. Um, there's a good chance that unworthiness is playing a part there. And you've probably heard me say, you cannot heal what you deny is wounded. Well, in this case, if we don't recognize that unworthiness is kind of under the surface there, then the things that we're focusing on kind of healing or fixing or changing or growing or whatever, we're not really getting at the core thing that actually needs the attention. I've worked with a lot of people, quite a few people that, particularly like earlier in our work together, would say, no, I don't believe that. Like, I believe that I'm worthy. I've never worried that I'm not worthy. But as we kind of explore a little bit, as we uncover where some of the wounds are, what some of the ideas that they hold on to, begin to recognize that unworthiness is a piece. One of the things that you may say to yourself is, I don't deserve it. You might compare yourself a lot and end up on the kind of losing end of that comparison. You might find yourself saying, I'm not enough of something. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not successful enough, skinny enough, pretty enough, strong enough, whatever enough it may be. Those are often tied to a sense of unworthiness. Um, and and beginning to believe in our worthiness is something that takes a fairly significant amount of time. Actually, beginning to believe in our worthiness doesn't necessarily take a significant amount of time, but fully being able to be rooted in our worthiness does take a pretty good amount of time, because that sense of unworthiness is a very significant core belief that lives in our being, very much like instinct. So changing that is definitely a process, and there's a lot of healing that needs to happen. Thank you, Harland. um, oh, Wendy, that really makes me so happy to hear that. I'm so, so glad that you've found somebody to work with and that the videos have been helpful. How do I get to be more comfortable to be and connect with my worthiness? It's a process. So what I was just saying, hopefully maybe helped with this question a little bit, but it is a process. Being able to recognize what are the things that happen in your daily life that you grab hold of that reinforce the idea that you're unworthy is really helpful. And this is one of the reasons why I encourage people to journal a lot, because if you're journaling every day, um, just kind of about what went on in your day, or where you find yourself struggling in that day, quite often you can identify specific things or thoughts that come to mind that reinforce that sense of unworthiness. So being able to see how that shows up for you, just on a day-to-day basis, is really helpful, because typically the thought that you're going to have, again, isn't necessarily going to be, I'm unworthy. It's going to be something else. But often you tend to have the same kinds of thoughts over and over again, that reinforce that sense of unworthiness. So being able to understand, what are the things that you're saying to yourself? What are the experiences that you're grabbing hold of that reinforce that unworthiness is a big part of how you begin to change that. I mean, there's things you have to do then after that to replace it, but just being able to recognize how frequently and what those things are that you're holding on to is kind of the work. It just takes lots lots of practice. How can worthiness be shown if our mood is so low? This is a great question, and it's also kind of difficult because it's a little chicken and egg type of thing. What I would say, if you're really having a hard time, one of the most beneficial things you can do, which also can be one of the most challenging things to do, is connect with somebody. Do not isolate, because when you isolate, it reinforces unworthiness. It directly reinforces unworthiness. So when you're really having a difficult day, whether there's something in particular going on or you're just feeling really bad about yourself, being able to connect with somebody. And one of the beautiful things about social media and like groups on Facebook and that kind of thing, there's a lot of things I don't like about it, but one of the beautiful things about it is being able to connect with people who kind of get it, people that kind of know what it feels like, people or a space where you feel like it's okay to show up and share what's going on. But hopefully there are also people in your real life that maybe you can call up or go visit or something like that. Allowing ourselves to connect with another person who we don't have to have a mask on, where we can actually show up and say, you don't have to share everything that's going on, but just be able to say, it's been a rough day. I could really use a distraction. Like that by itself could go a long way. Or if you're feeling really bold or courageous, you might even call up somebody or something and say, today's been a really rough day. Do you have a few minutes to talk? When we are feeling really bad about ourselves, our natural inclination, literally our survival mechanism, is going to want to pull us further away from people because we believe on a subconscious level that that's how we stay safe. It feels too risky to put ourselves out there because we're already feeling bad. We don't want to be hurt on top of that. So our survival says, nope, you pull back. And that's the drive to isolate, which on one level feels better because you're used to that feeling. But what we need in that moment is to not feel alone. We need connection. So everything in us is going to be fighting and saying, no, don't do that. You can't trust them. They don't want to hear it. There's so many different things that you might say to yourself. But pushing through that and connecting with somebody where you're not having to pretend that everything is okay. Again, it doesn't mean you have to go into all kinds of stuff. You can, if it's that kind of relationship. But even somebody that maybe doesn't know a whole lot about your past or whatever, but somebody that maybe knows that you've been going through something or whatever, like just being able to connect with that person so that you're not alone is so, so, so important. It is like the constant thing that with healing we have to keep coming back to. And I get so many eye rolls when I talk about this with people, especially if they're in a place where they're maybe not feeling so good, because it is the last thing you want to do. And everything in you is saying, no, that's not going to feel good. How is that possibly going to help? But it is. That is what we need in those moments. It is important, I think, to make sure that that the person that you reach out to, you feel like you've had enough interaction with that they're likely um, going to want to be there. And again, going back to kind of what I was saying earlier in this video, if they're going through their own stuff, or maybe they're at work or on their way out the door or something like that, and they say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of this, or I'm just about to go out the door, or whatever. Can I call you back? Or can we connect later?" Or something like that. It's important to not take that personally. And I know that that's really difficult to do, particularly when you're struggling, but we can't take it personally. Now, if that person tends to do that quite often, then seriously, I encourage you to try to find somebody else, because maybe that person isn't as invested, or maybe that person just isn't in a place in their own life where they're able or willing to be there for somebody else. But don't take it personally. Um, I don't feel worthy to speak up about the needs of my soul. Yeah, and being a parentified child, this is a really hard thing, and I will say that this is something that I've struggled with too. I'm so much better than I used to be, but, this is a real challenge, because literally you have learned that your needs, desires, wants don't matter. And sometimes even that it's not safe to have any, because as a child, if you had them but they were never met, then that hurts, and it reinforces an idea that you don't matter and you're not worthy of your desires, wants, or needs. So it becomes a very kind of concrete, ingrained idea that it's not okay, or that we don't have needs. So it's a matter of practicing. And part of that is connecting within yourself and asking yourself at different times of the day and night, what would really make me feel good right now? And sometimes it's something maybe kind of light or silly or something like that. Like, what would make me feel really good right now is a laugh, or what would make me feel really good right now is ice cream, or something like that. And sometimes it is something much more, or much deeper. But really allowing yourself to acknowledge, verbalize, actually say out loud what you want, that by itself is a really important practice, but it is hard. It is quite a challenge to be able to do that. I will say that I've had enough practice over the years, predominantly with my husband, that I'm pretty good now at being able um, to acknowledge within myself if I'm wanting something, and being able to express that, as well. And not just to him, but definitely it's been a lot more practice with him. So we can definitely get there. So, um, Wendy, so the things that you share here are things I think a lot of people watching right now can probably relate to. Um, the ideas of putting yourself down, worthless, fat, ugly, those kinds of things. Um, This is definitely, I'm glad that you're working with somebody, because this is something that takes time to work through. And having a professional to kind of help you consistently work through this is really how you do it. Um, but being able to, when you have these thoughts, being able to, it's called reality testing, but being able to find something contrary to what that thought is, that feels like it could be real for you, is really helpful. So if you're saying I'm ugly, um, so some ways that you might reality test that are, first of all, who's to say who's ugly and who's not? Like, there's some crazy defined idea of what ugly or pretty is, and it's not based in what is real. So you can be kind of a little esoteric in that way. But also, my guess is, and I'm saying this just based on how many people personally I've known that, or know of, who have believed that they're ugly, where that's just not how most people would perceive that person. Um, my guess is that there are probably people who have complimented you in some way about something related to how you look. And that could be so many different ways. So being able to then point to and remind yourself of some of those things that maybe people have said. Um, so that's just kind of an example specifically, like based on what you said. But like if somebody, like a thought that somebody might have is, I'm a failure. So reality testing could be, is that really true? Are you actually a failure? Because my guess is that there would be some things that you've done in your life or you've tried in your life that you didn't actually fail at. And again, it could be a little bit more esoteric, like, well, what does failure really mean? But it could be very specific because there's no doubt that somebody who sees themselves as a failure has done things in their lives, in their life, that was completely successful. Even if it didn't turn out exactly how they might have wanted it to, or maybe it was expected to, it still was perfectly fine. And my guess is that there would even be times that something did turn out exactly how somebody expected it to. So it's a matter of noticing what are those things that we're saying to ourselves, and then being able to find examples of what contradicts this idea. And you don't have to necessarily fully believe in it. It's just about, is it possible that this other thing could really be true? Kind of like what I was saying about, is it possible that my husband really could love me? Even though I didn't believe that he could, even though I had all kinds of reasons why he wouldn't or shouldn't, was it possible that he actually could? Well, the reality is almost anything is possible. So when I asked myself that question, the answer was yes. And that didn't immediately change everything, but just continuing to do that over and over again helped in getting there. Um, don't like to journal because it makes me upset and I don't want to cry. This is actually one of the reasons why journaling might be really, really beneficial for you. Um, it probably might be best if you do have professional support, or at least a support system in some way. Um, but allowing ourselves to feel is necessary for healing. Allowing ourselves to feel is necessary to being a healthy and happy human being. But I understand what you're saying, and we have emotions for a reason. Just like we blink for a reason, we yawn for a reason, we have automatic reactions when something is flying at our head for a reason. Allowing ourselves to feel, while not easy, uh, definitely it's not easy, especially if we have completely shut down emotion, but it is necessary. But if you have not allowed yourself to feel at all, and you find yourself with some emotion kind of right there under the surface, ideally you would have some professional support or at least a good support system in place. The idea that I can't do anything right, yeah, that was a big thing for me. Um, that was something I struggled with quite a bit. And the reality is that is not true. that cannot possibly be true that you can't do anything right. So looking for examples of when you did do things right, because they exist. I can very little I promise, but I feel pretty confident that I can promise for any of you listening that there are plenty of things that you've done right. Um, yeah, isolating is never going to be a good thing. Now, who we connect with does matter. It's important that we connect with somebody who is able to support us, because if we connect with somebody who is not very healthy, then it can make things even worse for us. So, what if a lot of people tell me that I'm weird and alien and I also feel like it? How would I know if it is true or lots of people are just really messed up? Is it a worthiness thing or a brainwash thing? It's so hard to tell for people who've been bullied all their lives. So I think, so I'm not exactly sure what you mean by weird, but I think that we can be a little weird. And I don't see that as like a negative thing necessarily at all. I think we can be a little weird or not normal, in terms of mainstream or whatever, um, without it having to mean that there's something really wrong with us. Um, and this is kind of a complicated question and answer because there are a lot of caveats. There are a lot of different pieces of this that can make my answer one kind of go one way or another. Um, Oftentimes, we tend to, as people that don't feel very good about ourselves, as survivors of abuse, we often tend to surround ourselves with people who have similar issues in terms of not being very healthy. And so, quite often, especially as we get healthier, as we set boundaries, as we change, in terms of how we show up in the world because we're feeling more confident, because we're trying new things or whatever, we're asking for what we want. People that have been around us when we haven't been particularly healthy, when we start making some of those changes, they are often not going to be very happy about it. They may not recognize on a conscious level that they're not happy about it, but often they're not going to be happy about it because it's changing the dynamic that's there. So I've seen this happen many, many, many times. And whether it's friends or even sometimes a workplace or a family, that as one person begins to get healthier, the unhealthy people around, when I say unhealthy, it doesn't necessarily mean that like they're really, really messed up. It could just mean that they don't understand where they're wounded or what their struggles are or whatever. But the people who are not particularly healthy around us, they will often try to hold us back from making the kinds of changes that lead to us setting boundaries or possibly even move away from those relationships. They will often push back against us and tell us that we are, one of the things that happens all the time is somebody will say, "You've changed. Like, you've changed since you started doing this or that or whatever." Like that's a bad thing. They'll say things like, "You think that you're better than I am," or they'll say things sometimes intentionally hurtful, sometimes not, but they'll say things to make you question that what you're doing is right. But they do that because they want you to stay the same. And that's just the dynamics of how systems work in general. People who are healthy are going to support you in that change. So, with your question here, if those people are people that have always been around you and they're used to you being a certain way, then they're likely not going to be very happy with any positive changes that you're making. If, on the other hand, these are people that really are pretty healthy people and point something out to you, and it's something that you hear time and time again, then maybe there is something that's a little bit different than for you, that is different than them or whatever. But that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. So let's see. I'm just going to read your question again. So maybe what would be important for you is kind of understanding, what does that look like to be different? And is it problematic? Is the way that you're different creating difficulty for you in your life? Or is it just creating difficulty for them because you've changed? Maybe you're no longer willing to always be there for somebody else if they're never willing to be there for you. Maybe you're setting some boundaries, or whatever it may be. So kind of asking yourself that question, and that might be a good way to think about it. Tracy, I'm not sure what you're referring to here. The same thing as being counter-dependent. So maybe you can either elaborate on that, or maybe that was something that was posted before. EMDR. So Wendy, I have talked a lot of different ways in a lot of different videos about EMDR. So I think trust yourself. If you try it and it feels like it's helpful for you, then that's great. If it feels like it's not helpful for you, then I think it's important that you talk about that with your counselor. A lot of counselors and therapists who focus on like trauma use EMDR. Some people do find it helpful. I tend to hear more from people who don't find it necessarily all that helpful. But I think what's most important is that you trust yourself in doing it. Wendy, I'm not sure what you're referring to here in terms of, is it normal to do what? In terms of going to people and asking for help, do you mean like friends or professional? Not liking connection with people is often about self-protection. Now, of course, there are some people that maybe you just don't get along with or don't like. But like if you just generally feel that you don't like to be around people, then often that is a self-protective type of thing. It could also be that you're somewhat of an introvert, but if it's more about like this kind of strong feeling almost, if you think about connecting with somebody or sharing with somebody, then it's probably some fear that's around that. I actually did a video a while ago on how, I don't remember the title, but how independence can actually be a problem. I don't remember what the title was. If after this is over, I might try to go look at it, and I'll look for it, and I will share a link in the description for it. But quite often it is about self-protection. It's about fear of being seen. It's about trying to protect ourselves from feeling shame. It could be a lot of different pieces. So I will share that link, and it might be helpful for you to watch that. Yeah, isolating is never, never, never a good thing. It really isn't. And I've really learned that so much in the work that I've done. Just seeing how clients will tend to isolate and pull back even like from me, as well as other people in their lives. And that not only kind of just seeing a pattern in how that tends to happen, but really seeing the impact that that ends up having and how they end up ultimately feeling worse as a result of that isolation. Um, and that takes a lot of work to be able to accept that feeling of self-protectedness, which isn't actually protecting you from anything, but to recognize that that actually isn't necessarily a good feeling, and to recognize that there is actually something good that can feel, or that you can end up feeling good when you do put yourself out there and connect. Hi, Lenny. I'm glad that you're here too. Yeah, finding those people. Like, how do you find people to, and this goes back to Wendy, I think. So this is hard. One thing I will say is that a group, like a support group, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, if you're a survivor, it doesn't have to be specifically for survivors, though I always think that that's a good idea. Um, but support groups or circles for, oftentimes there's like women's circles, um, even going to something like a yoga class, or I think it's international. I don't think, well, I know that it is international. I don't know where everywhere internationally it is, but there's something called meetup.com that is a great place to find people that have kind of similar interests. So that could even be a place where you might meet people that certainly you're not going to go in and into a setting and meet a bunch of new people and just suddenly open up and share everything that's going on. But it's a good place to maybe develop some connections with people that you might have something in common, because you search for groups with common interests. So it could be almost anything. You'll find there. You could even start your own group. I know that there are a lot of groups out there for people, like they're like coaches and stuff will create a group for people that um, like focusing on limiting beliefs or living your best life, or like there's all different kinds of things out there. So that might be a good place if you feel like you truly don't have anybody healthy around you. That might be a good place, a support group as well. Um, Possibly even in your community, you might look for community like led things, like maybe even volunteering for something, because if you're volunteering for something, other volunteers who are there, like that's going to be an interest that you share. So there might be some commonality there, but it is a challenge. Meeting new people and putting yourself out there is scary. Even if it doesn't consciously feel scary, your instincts are going to tell you that's not okay because it wants to protect you. Um, and the reality is that meeting people, like meeting new friends as adults, is a challenge. It really is. Regardless of what your history is, making friends as adults is a challenge. Um, and for most of us, if we've not been particularly healthy, we tend to be surrounded by other people who are not necessarily really healthy. Um, so that can be a challenge as well. But sometimes we often will have one or two people in our circle, so to speak, who are relatively healthy, but maybe you just haven't been very open with them, or maybe they haven't been very open with you because they're afraid of being judged or seeming weak, or that that's not what the purpose of this kind of connection is about. So sometimes somebody stepping forward and saying, just kind of throwing something out there can actually be a really big benefit to other people in that setting as well. Um, Marianne, so you're talking about an age difference here, and I don't know what the setting is, but I mean, obviously, you need friends that are your age. Everybody needs friends that are their age. Um, but, and I don't know if this is your old group, because that might be a little bit of an issue as well, because you're at 20, you're going to be in a very different place than people at 40 would be, but generally speaking. But you can also still have a strong connection with somebody who is twice your age in this example. So I, I don't think that has to be a completely bad thing necessarily. Um, but finding some people and on meetup .com, you can actually find groups that are designed specifically for people of certain age ranges, which is another thing that I really like about it. Um, um, yeah, it's hard when you feel like there's something very different about you, whether that's age or something else, to feel much of a connection. But I think that sometimes, and obviously this is, circumstances are going to be different, but sometimes I think that particularly when it comes to age, I think there can be a lot of benefit in having relationships. I'm not talking about best friends necessarily, but having relationships with people where there is a decent difference in age for lots of different valuable reasons. So don't let that be something specifically that keeps you from having a desire to connect, but certainly consider being open to exploring other options as well. I think that's important. So I think that I have addressed everything here. So in honor of World Mental Health Day, I'd really like you to just think about what can you do today to help further your own well-being. And a lot of that might have to do with connecting. It may be, how can I share something with this person that's already in your life? How can I share something with this person that might help me feel like they might actually really care about me? If you've been isolating, what is something I can do to connect with somebody else? And again, there are so many different ways that can look. Um, but really think about standing in the truth of who you are because it's who you are, not because of how you show up for somebody else. And from that place, when you think about sharing something with somebody or connecting with somebody, your survival mechanism doesn't kick in as much because it doesn't feel as risky. And we all need to feel connected as human beings to be healthy, happy, whole. We have to believe and feel connection with other people. It is necessary. It is absolutely necessary. It doesn't have to be a lot of other people, but we need to feel that connection. And feeling that connection does help us believe in our worthiness, because we can start questioning in terms of that reality testing. We can start to see that we matter to somebody else, that somebody can still like us and want to be around us, even if or when we're struggling, even if and when we aren't giving to them constantly or especially when we're not. So I hope that as you kind of reflect on this afterwards, whether you're watching live or on replay, I hope that you really connect to those pieces within yourself about who you are as a human being that make you worthy, that help you feel good about who you are. Because that is what makes you worthy, not about what you give or how you show up for somebody else. So, thank you all for being here. And if you've got questions or comments and you're watching this on the replay, please make sure to share them. And thank you for being here. I'll look forward to seeing, hopefully, all of you soon. Thanks for being here. Happy World Mental Health Day. Bye.